You know that feeling when someone looks at you like you're invisible? Like you're standing right there, breathing the same air, but somehow you don't matter enough to acknowledge? That's how Rebecca looked at me the first time I met her. My name is Margaret Shun, and at 63 years old, I thought I'd seen every shade of disrespect life could throw at a woman. I was wrong. It was a Friday evening in downtown Seattle when my son David called and asked me to join him and his new wife for dinner. They'd been married 3 months, and I'd only met Rebecca twice. Once at the wedding where she barely said 10 words to me, and once at a family gathering where she spent the entire time on her phone. "Mom, please come," David had said, his voice carrying that pleading tone he used to have as a boy. "Rebecca really wants to get to know you better." I should have known right then that something was off. When someone has to insist that their spouse wants to know you, it usually means the opposite. But I'm a mother, and mothers believe in second chances. So I ironed my best blouse, the cream-colored one with the pearl buttons that my late husband Thomas had bought me 20 years ago, and I drove my old Honda Civic to the Meridian, one of those restaurants where the menu doesn't have prices and the portions are small enough to fit in a teaspoon. The restaurant smelled like money. That peculiar scent of expensive wine, fresh flowers, and the kind of bread that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Rebecca and David were already seated at a table near the window. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my car payment. Her blonde hair swept up in one of those effortlessly perfect styles that actually takes hours to achieve. "Margaret," she said when I approached, not Mom or even Mrs. Chun, just my first name, flat and dismissive. "You found the place." "Yes." David gave me excellent directions, I replied, smiling as I bent to kiss my son's cheek. He looked uncomfortable, his ties slightly loosened, his eyes darting between his wife and me like a referee waiting for a match to start. I sat down, and the waiter immediately appeared with menus. Rebecca ordered without looking at him, a glass of Chateau Margaux and the seared duck breast. David mumbled something about the salmon. When the waiter turned to me, I glanced at the menu and felt my heart sink. The cheapest entree was $48. "I'll have a Caesar salad, please," I said, handing back the menu. Rebecca's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "Just a salad?" "David, your mother must not be feeling well." "I'm fine, dear," I said evenly. "I had a late lunch." The lie tasted bitter, but I wasn't about to admit that spending $50 on a single meal felt obscene when I still clipped coupons and bought generic brands at the grocery store. Rebecca studied me with those ice blue eyes, and I could see the calculation happening behind them. "So, Margaret," she began, swirling her wine glass with practiced elegance, "David tells me you still work at that little cleaning company." The way she said little made it sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. I felt David stiffen beside her, but I kept my voice calm. "Yes, I manage operations for Pristine Solutions. We handle commercial and residential properties throughout King County." "How quaint," Rebecca said, and the word hung in the air like spoiled perfume. "I work for Cascade Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it? We're one of the largest commercial property management firms in the Northwest. I'm a senior acquisitions manager." I had heard of Cascade Industries. In fact, I knew quite a bit about it, but I simply nodded and took a sip of water. "David says you live in that same old house in Rainier Valley," Rebecca continued, her tone dripping with pity. "The one he grew up in. That neighborhood has really changed, hasn't it?" "It's home," I said simply. "Well, David and I just closed on a condo in Bellevue. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, views of Lake Washington. David, show your mother the pictures." My son fumbled with his phone, dutifully pulling up photos of gleaming hardwood floors and granite countertops. I made appreciative noises, even though each image felt like a small knife reminding me that my son had moved into a world where I no longer fit. The food arrived, and I picked at my salad while Rebecca held court, talking about her latest acquisition deal, her yoga instructor, the charity gala she was organizing. David barely spoke, just nodded and smiled, and I realized with a sinking heart that I was watching my son disappear into someone else's life. "You know, Margaret," Rebecca said as she delicately cut her duck into precise pieces, "David and I have been talking about the future. When we have children, We want to make sure they grow up with certain advantages. Good schools, cultural exposure, the right connections. The implication was clear. I wouldn't be part of that picture. I was the embarrassing mother from the poor neighborhood who worked in cleaning services. Children are blessed to have love, I said quietly. Everything else is just decoration. Rebecca laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Love doesn't pay for Harvard, does it? David finally spoke up. Rebecca, come on, what? She turned to him with exaggerated innocence. I'm just being practical. Your mother understands. Don't you, Margaret? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I'd been refusing to acknowledge. He was afraid of her. This beautiful, accomplished woman had somehow made my confident, kind son into someone who couldn't even defend his own mother. The dinner dragged on for another 40 minutes. When the check came, Rebecca made a show of reaching for it, then paused. Oh, Margaret, did you want to contribute? I know David said you're on a fixed income, so we don't want to assume. The restaurant fell silent. At least that's how it felt to me. Every eye in the place seemed to turn toward our table, watching the elderly Asian woman in the old blouse being humiliated by the young blonde in designer clothes. Rebecca, David hissed, his face flushing red. It's fine, I said, pulling out my wallet. I had exactly $63 in cash, money I'd been saving for my grandson's birthday present. I placed it on the table, knowing it wouldn't even cover my salad and water. This is what I can offer. Rebecca glanced at the bills and smiled. That's sweet. We'll cover the rest. She pulled out a black American Express card and handed it to the waiter without looking at him. I stood up, my legs shaking, but my spine straight. Thank you for dinner. David, I love you. I'll see you soon. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, but by the time I reached my car, tears were streaming down my face. Not because of the money or the humiliation, but because I just watched my son choose silence over defending me. I sat in my Honda, gripping the steering wheel, and let myself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove home to Rainier Valley, to the house where I'd raised David alone after Thomas died, to the neighborhood that Rebecca thought was beneath her. I didn't know it then, but that dinner was about to change everything. Because Rebecca had just made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed she knew who I was based on what she could see. She had no idea what I'd built in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. The house was dark when I got home. I left the lights off and sat in Thomas's old recliner, the one I'd kept even though the fabric was worn and it didn't match anything else in the living room. This chair had held him through his final months, through the cancer that ate him from the inside out, and somehow it still smelled faintly of his aftershave 20 years later. Did you see your boy tonight? I whispered to the darkness, to wherever Thomas was. Did you see what's become of him? The silence answered back, which was the only answer I expected. I sat there for a long time, watching the streetlights paint shadows on the ceiling, thinking about the years after Thomas died. David had been 8 years old when I became a widow. 8 years old with his father's gentle eyes and his grandmother's stubborn chin, looking to me for answers I didn't have. The life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. Thomas had been a good man, but not a practical one. No savings, no investments, just love and good intentions. I'd taken the only job I could find with my limited English and no college degree, cleaning offices downtown. $5 an hour, working nights while David slept at my mother's house. I'd scrub toilets and empty trash cans and vacuum endless corridors, coming home at dawn smelling of bleach and exhaustion. But I watched. God, how I watched. I saw how those office buildings ran, who managed them, where the money flowed. I saw contracts left carelessly on desks, heard conversations in elevators about property acquisitions and tenant agreements. And slowly, so slowly that I barely noticed it myself, I began to understand. By the time David turned 10, I'd save enough to buy my own cleaning supplies and register a business. Pristine Solutions. One woman with a van and a dream, taking on the small jobs the big companies didn't want. I underbid everyone, worked harder than anyone, and treated every doorknob like it was made of gold. Within 3 years, I had 5 employees. Within 7, I had 23. By the time David graduated high school, Pristine Solutions had contracts with half the commercial buildings in Seattle. But I never told David the whole story. He knew I owned a cleaning company. He knew we were comfortable, that I could afford his college tuition without loans. What he didn't know was that 15 years ago, I'd started quietly buying those buildings I used to clean. I'd learned from watching. Learned that the real money wasn't in cleaning the buildings, it was in owning them. So I'd partnered with investors, used my contracts as leverage, and slowly built a portfolio. An office building here, a warehouse there, an apartment complex in Capitol Hill. By 2010, I'd incorporated under a holding company, MC Properties, LLC. The MC stood for Margaret Chun, but most people assumed it was just initials, meaningless corporate speak. I liked it that way. I operated through lawyers and property managers, keeping my name off everything except the legal documents buried in courthouse records. And 5 years ago, when Cascade Industries started aggressively expanding and squeezing out smaller property management firms, I'd done something crazy. I'd bought them. Not directly, of course. I'd worked through investment groups and shell companies, acquiring shares quietly over 2 years until I owned 51%. The board didn't even know who their majority shareholder was, just that MC Properties had very specific expectations about ethical business practices and employee treatment. Rebecca worked for a company I owned. She'd been hired by the CEO I'd appointed, worked in offices I'd renovated, drew a salary that ultimately came from my decisions. And she had no idea. I'd kept it secret because I was afraid. Afraid that if David knew I had money, he'd think differently about our struggles. Afraid that it would change how he saw his childhood, make him wonder why I'd let him work part-time jobs in high school when I could have just given him everything. But mostly, I was afraid he'd think I'd been lying to him all these years. And in a way, I had been, not about love or values, but about the scope of what I'd built from those nights scrubbing floors. I stood up from the recliner and walked to my bedroom, to the closet where I kept my important documents in a fireproof safe. Inside was the folder I'd assembled months ago when David first told me he was getting serious with Rebecca. I'd done my research. I always did due diligence on anyone who might become family. Rebecca Hartwell, born in Spokane to a middle-class family, put herself through business school with a combination of scholarships and student loans, worked hard to climb the corporate ladder at Cascade Industries. On paper, she should have been someone I admired, someone who understood struggle and perseverance. But somewhere along the way, she decided that her past was something to erase, that looking down on people like her former self made her more legitimate in the circles she wanted to join. I'd seen it before, people who escape poverty only to become its harshest critics, as if disdain could create distance from who they used to be. The folder also contained documents about David's trust fund. Yes, my son had a trust fund. He'd have access to it when he turned 35, just 3 years away. $5 million, carefully invested, growing steadily. I never told him because I wanted him to build his own life, make his own choices, without money warping his decisions. Now I wondered if that had been a mistake. If I told him years ago, would he have chosen differently? Would Rebecca have looked twice at him if she'd known his mother wasn't just the cleaning lady, but the landlord? I closed the folder and sat on my bed, feeling every one of my 63 years. Outside, a car alarm went off, its shrill cry cutting through the night. In Rainier Valley, that was just another sound in the symphony of working-class life. Car alarms, police sirens, the rumble of trucks making early morning deliveries. Rebecca thought this neighborhood had changed code for too many immigrants, too much poverty, too much reality. She had no idea that I owned 3 apartment buildings here, that I deliberately kept the rents low so families like mine used to be could still afford to live with dignity. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "I'm so sorry about tonight, Mom. Please call me tomorrow." I typed back, "Sleep well, sweetheart. I love you." Then I added, "And I'm proud of you always." It was true. I was proud of him, even if I was disappointed in his choices. He was still the boy who'd held my hand at his father's funeral, who'd written me Mother's Day cards with drawings of us together, who'd call me every Sunday during college just to talk. Rebecca hadn't taken that away. Not yet, anyway. I turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me. Thomas's chair creaked in the living room. The furnace hummed to life. The old pipes clanged as they always did at night. This house had witnessed my transformation from grieving widow to business owner to property magnate. These walls had absorbed my tears and my triumphs, had sheltered my son while I built an empire he knew nothing about. Tomorrow, I go to work like always. I check on properties, review contracts, meet with managers. I wear my simple clothes and drive my old Honda and live my quiet life. But something had shifted tonight. Rebecca had drawn a line in the sand, declared war without knowing her enemy. And while I'd spent decades avoiding conflict, watching from the shadows, I realized that sometimes silence isn't wisdom, it's cowardice. Thomas would have laughed at that. My tiger, he used to call me, because I was fierce about protecting what mattered. I've been a kitten for too long, scared of showing my claws. Maybe it was time to remind everyone, including my son, that this old woman from Rainier Valley was nobody's fool. Monday morning came with rain, the kind of persistent Seattle drizzle that makes everything look gray and defeated. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through scenarios and conversations, rehearsing confrontations that might never happen. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. David's name lit up the screen. "Mom," he said without preamble, his voice thick with sleep or maybe tears. "I need to apologize." What Rebecca said at dinner, David interrupted gently. "You're a grown man. You don't need to apologize for your wife." But she was cruel. I should have stopped her. "Yes," I said, because there was no point in lying. "You should have." The silence between us felt like an ocean. Finally, he spoke again. "She's under a lot of pressure at work. There's some big corporate restructuring happening at Cascade Industries. She's afraid she might lose her position." There was the excuse, the justification. I gripped my coffee mug tighter. "Pressure doesn't create character, David. It reveals it." "I know, Mom. I know. Can I come by this weekend?" "Just me." "Of course. This is always your home." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I rarely allowed myself. I cried. Not the dignified tears from Friday night, but the ugly, choking sobs of a mother watching her child slip away. I cried for the little boy who used to think I could fix anything, and for the man who no longer believed I mattered. Then I wiped my face, finished my coffee, and called my attorney. "Margaret," Richard Chun said warmly. No relation, despite the shared surname, but we'd worked together for 15 years, and he knew where all my bodies were buried, legally speaking. "What can I do for you?" "I want you to request a meeting with Cascade Industries Board of Directors. Tell them MC Properties wants to review the current management structure and personnel performance metrics." Richard paused. "This is about your son's wife. This is about due diligence," I corrected. "I haven't reviewed operations in over a year. It's time." "Margaret, be careful. Corporate revenge has a way of backfiring." "This isn't revenge, Richard. It's transparency. Schedule the meeting for Friday." After I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the window above the sink. The woman staring back had gray hair she'd stopped dyeing years ago, lines around her eyes from laughter and worry, and a steel in her spine that came from surviving things people like Rebecca couldn't imagine. I wasn't going to destroy her. I wasn't even going to fire her. But I was going to make sure she understood exactly who she'd insulted over Caesar salad and wine. The rest of the week passed in a blur of ordinary activities that felt anything but ordinary. I visited properties, reviewed contracts, smiled at tenants and employees who had no idea their landlord was the short Asian woman who sometimes watered the lobby plants. On Wednesday, I stopped by one of my buildings in Capitol Hill, a mixed-use property with retail on the ground floor and apartments above. The afternoon sun was breaking through clouds, making the wet streets steam. As I was checking on a water leak in the basement, I heard a familiar voice in the lobby above. "Rebecca." She was there for a showing, I realized as I quietly climbed the stairs. Cascade Industries managed this building, though of course they didn't own it, I did. Rebecca was walking a potential commercial tenant through one of the empty retail spaces, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged lobby. "This is a prime location," she was saying, her heels clicking on the polished concrete. "The owner is very motivated to fill this space, so we have flexibility on terms. I stayed back, watching through the stairwell door. She looked immaculate as always, her suit perfectly tailored, her presentation polished. She was good at her job. I'd give her that. The potential tenant, a young woman with purple hair and paint-stained jeans, looked around skeptically. The rent seems high for this neighborhood. Property values are rising rapidly in this area, Rebecca assured her smoothly. This is an investment in your business's future. Within a year, you'll be grateful you got in at this price. It was a reasonable pitch, except for one problem. I'd explicitly instructed property managers to keep rent stable in this building to maintain community character. Rebecca was either ignoring those instructions or didn't know about them. I made a mental note and slipped back down to the basement. I learned long ago that knowledge is power, but timing is everything. Friday arrived with unusual sunshine, as if the universe was setting a stage. The Cascade Industries board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in their downtown offices located in a building I'd owned for 7 years. I dressed carefully that morning. Not the simple clothes I usually wore, but a charcoal gray suit Thomas had loved, paired with the jade pin that my mother had given me before she died. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Polished, professional, powerful. Richard picked me up at 1:30. "You sure about this?" he asked as we drove downtown. I've never been more sure of anything. The Cascade Industries offices occupied the top 3 floors of my building. The elevator ride felt endless, my stomach doing flips despite my outward calm. When the doors opened, I was greeted by a receptionist who looked barely old enough to drink. "Margaret Chun and Richard Chun to see the board," my attorney announced. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. She'd obviously been briefed, and she quickly led us to the conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay, the water sparkling in the rare sunshine. Around the long table sat 7 people, the CEO, 4 board members, the CFO, and the head of HR. Mrs. Chun, the CEO, a silver-haired man named Douglas Whitmore, stood and extended his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person, Mr. Whitmore," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting. Of course, when a majority shareholder requests a meeting, we make it happen." We settled into chairs, Richard beside me, his briefcase already open and organized with that precision I valued in him. "I'll get straight to the point," I began. "I've been reviewing operations, and I have concerns about whether our company values are being consistently applied across all departments and personnel." Douglas nodded slowly. "What specific concerns?" "I'd like a comprehensive review of the acquisitions department, starting with a detailed analysis of current projects, client relationships, and employee conduct both internally and in external representations." The CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Okoye, spoke up. "Is this about someone specific?" "This is about ensuring that everyone who represents Cascade Industries understands that we are, above all, a company built on respect and integrity. I want to be certain that every employee, from entry-level to senior management, treats our clients, vendors, and frankly, anyone they encounter, with professionalism and courtesy." "Of course," Douglas said, though confusion flickered across his face. "We have annual ethics reviews. I want monthly reviews for the next quarter," I interrupted. "And I want exit interviews conducted with the last 5 employees who left the acquisitions department. I want to know if there are cultural issues we've been overlooking." Patricia and Douglas exchanged glances. The board members shifted in their seats. They were doing the math, trying to figure out what had triggered this sudden attention from an owner who'd been mostly hands-off for years. "Mrs. Chun," Douglas said carefully, "has someone complained about a specific employee?" "No one has complained to me officially," I said truthfully. "But I've recently had an experience that made me question whether our values are truly embedded in our culture or just written in our mission statement." Richard slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Chun would also like to see promotion criteria and compensation analyses for all senior staff, with particular attention to whether advancement is based solely on metrics or also on demonstrated leadership and ethical standards." The meeting lasted another hour. We reviewed financial reports, discussed market strategies, and outlined the new oversight measures I wanted implemented. Through it all, I maintained perfect composure. The grandmother who'd been mocked for being poor now, casually directing a company worth over $200 million. As we stood to leave, Douglas walked us to the elevator. "Mrs. Chun, may I ask what prompted this increased involvement? Is there something specific we should know about?" I smiled at him, the same smile I'd given Rebecca at dinner. "Mr. Whitmore, I built this company because I believe business should be about more than profit. It should be about treating people with dignity. Sometimes we all need reminders of that." The elevator doors closed on his puzzled expression. In the car, Richard let out a low whistle. "You just scared them senseless." "Good," I said. "Fear leads to attention, and attention leads to change. Rebecca is going to be under a microscope. Everyone's going to be under a microscope," I corrected. "That's the point. I'm not targeting her specifically. I'm demanding accountability generally. If she's as good at her job as she claims, she'll be fine." But we both knew the truth. When you suddenly announce increased scrutiny after years of distance, people notice. And Rebecca, with her expensive tastes and dismissive attitudes, was about to discover that her job security wasn't as solid as she'd assumed. My phone buzzed as we pulled into my driveway. A text from David. "Still okay for tomorrow? I miss you, Mom." "Can't wait." I typed back. "I love you." I did love him. That was the complicated truth at the heart of all this. I loved him enough to let him make his own choices, even bad ones. But I also loved him enough to show him, and his wife, that respect isn't optional, even for the poor mother-in-law in the old house. Tomorrow I'd see my son. We'd talk, really talk, maybe for the first time since his wedding. And eventually, somehow, the truth would come out. But tonight, I sat in Thomas's recliner and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Not revenge. I wasn't interested in that. Just the quiet knowledge that actions have consequences and karma, as they say, had a very good memory. David arrived at 10 a.m. carrying flowers from the Pike Place market, dahlias, my favorite, in deep reds and purples. He stood on the porch looking nervous, like a teenager on a first date, and I realized it had been months since we'd been alone together. "Come in, sweetheart," I said, taking the flowers. "I'll make us coffee." We settled into our old rhythm easily. He sat at the kitchen table while I arranged the dahlias in my grandmother's vase, the one with the hand-painted cranes. Coffee brewed, filling the house with its warm, familiar smell. For a moment, we could have been 10 years in the past, before Rebecca, before complications. "Mom," David started, then stopped. Started again. I don't know how to say this. Say it badly, then I suggested, sitting across from him. "We'll fix it from there." He laughed, a sound I'd been missing. "Do you remember what you told me when Dad died? You said that hard truths are like medicine. They taste awful going down, but they're necessary for healing." I remember. Rebecca is not happy. In our marriage, I mean. She says I'm not ambitious enough, that I'm content to coast in my middle management position while she's climbing the corporate ladder. Are you content? He considered this. I thought I was. I like my job. I make good money. We have a nice place, nice things. But according to Rebecca, nice isn't enough. She wants power, prestige. She wants to be somebody. And what do you want to be? Happy, he said simply. I want to come home and not feel like I'm entering a competition. I want to have kids who know both their parents' names because we're actually home for dinner. He trailed off, looking at the table. I want what you and Dad had. My eyes burned with sudden tears. Your father and I were very poor when we were happy. I know. Rebecca doesn't understand that. To her, poverty is failure, and failure is shameful. Is that why you didn't defend me at dinner? His head snapped up. I was going to. I swear I was. But then I thought about the fight we'd have later, and I'm ashamed, Mom. I chose the path of least resistance, and I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and took his hand. David, I forgive you. But you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. Not for Rebecca, not for me, but for yourself. We talked for hours. He told me about the arguments, the cold silences, the way Rebecca had started staying late at the office more and more. How she'd begun mentioning divorce casually, as if testing the word. She said something weird last week, David added. She came home angry about some new oversight at work. Said the owners were suddenly demanding all these reviews and accountability measures. She seemed almost paranoid about it. I kept my expression neutral. Oversight is normal in business, I guess, but she's been obsessed with it. Keeps talking about how she needs to prove herself, show that she's indispensable. We moved to the living room after lunch. David sprawled on the couch like he used to as a teenager, and I felt time fold back on itself. This was my boy, before the world complicated him. Can I tell you something? I said, making a decision. Something I should have told you years ago. He sat up, alert to the change in my tone. What's wrong? Are you sick? No, nothing like that. I'm healthy. But there are things about our life, about our finances, that you don't fully understand. I told him everything. Not all at once. It would have been too much, but slowly, carefully, watching his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally awe. I told him about the years of cleaning offices, about watching and learning, about the first property I'd purchased, using every penny I'd saved plus a loan from a Korean community association, about how that single building had become 2, then 5, then 20. I told him about MC Properties, about quietly buying Cascade Industries, about the trust fund that would be his in 3 years. Wait, he interrupted, standing up and pacing. Wait, you're saying you own the company Rebecca works for? 51%, yes. And you've been letting her treat you like. He couldn't finish the sentence. I've been living my life quietly. I corrected. Your wife's behavior is her choice, not my responsibility to prevent. But Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why don't we think we struggled so much when you were building all this? This was the question I'd been dreading, because I wanted you to understand the value of things. I wanted you to work hard, save money, appreciate what you had. If I'd raised you knowing we were wealthy, would you have become the same person? He stopped pacing and looked at me. I don't know. Maybe not. But Mom, I've spent my whole adult life trying to make enough money to take care of you. Every promotion I chased, every extra shift I took, it was so I could eventually help you retire, buy you a better car and nicer house. I know, I whispered, and that made me so proud. Don't you see? Your generosity, your care for me, that came from believing I needed it. Would you have been so compassionate if you'd known I was fine? That's not fair, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. You manipulated the situation to test me. No, I manipulated nothing. I just didn't advertise my success. There's a difference. We sat in heavy silence for a long moment. Then David started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. What? I asked. Rebecca. God, Rebecca. She's been so smug about her job, her salary, her position. And the whole time, she's been working for my mother. He laughed harder. The irony is almost perfect. David, I didn't do this to embarrass her. No, but she's going to be mortified when she finds out. His laughter faded into something more serious. Are you going to tell her? I don't know. I was thinking about it. That's actually why I called for increased oversight at Cascade Industries. I wanted to see how she'd perform under pressure, whether her work ethic matched her arrogance. Mom, David said slowly, I think I'm going to leave her. The words hung in the air between us. I've been expecting many things, but not this, not so directly. That's a serious decision. I know. But watching you sit here, telling me about everything you've built while staying humble, while still driving that old Honda, and clipping coupons, even though you could buy 10 new cars without noticing the cost, it made me realize something. Rebecca and I don't share the same values. We never did. I just wanted so badly to be chosen by someone successful that I ignored whether we actually liked each other. David, no, let me finish. You raised me to believe that people matter more than possessions. That kindness is currency. Rebecca sees the world as a pyramid she needs to climb, and anyone not climbing with her is dead weight. I'm tired of being dead weight to my own wife. I went to him and pulled him into a hug. He was 42 inches taller than me now, but he folded into my embrace like he had at 8 years old, and I felt his tears on my shoulder. Whatever you decide, I told him, I'm here. Always. We spent the rest of Saturday together, cooking dinner, watching old movies, existing in the comfortable silence of people who truly know each other. He spent the night in his old room, sleeping under the same quilt his grandmother had made, surrounded by the childhood he'd almost forgotten. Sunday morning, he left early to go home and face whatever came next. I watched him drive away, my heart aching and hopeful in equal measure. The truth was out now, at least between us. What came next would depend on what David chose to do with it, and how Rebecca responded when she inevitably learned that the poor mother-in-law she'd mocked owned the career she was so proud of. I wasn't looking forward to that conversation, but I wasn't afraid of it either. Sometimes the truth is its own kind of justice. Monday morning brought clouds and a message from Richard. Board completed preliminary review of acquisitions department found several concerning issues. Call me. I waited until I'd finished my coffee before dialing him back. Some conversations required proper preparation. Rebecca Hartwell has been inflating rental rates beyond the parameters you set, Richard said without preamble. She's been pocketing the difference through a side arrangement with certain property managers. Not huge amounts, a few $100s per property per month, but over 18 months, we're looking at roughly $40,000. I closed my eyes. I'd expected arrogance, maybe incompetence. Not theft. You're certain? Paper trail is clear. The CFO found it within 2 hours of starting the deep dive. Douglas wants to know how you want to proceed. Termination? Legal action? Neither. Not yet. I want to meet with her first. Privately. Margaret, that's not. I want to meet with her, I repeated firmly. Schedule it for Wednesday afternoon. Tell her it's a routine meeting with a major stakeholder. Don't mention my name. Richard sighed the sigh of a lawyer whose client insisted on doing things the hard way. Wednesday at 2. I'll send the details. I spent Monday and Tuesday in a strange limbo, going through my normal routines while preparing for a conversation I'd never imagined having. David called Tuesday night. I told her I want a separation, he said quietly. She laughed at first, thought I was joking. When she realized I was serious, He paused. She told me I'd never do better than her, that I should be grateful she married me in the first place. How did you respond? I told her gratitude shouldn't feel like drowning. Then I packed a bag and went to a hotel. I'm at the Marriott downtown. Come stay with me, I said immediately. No, Mom, I need to do this on my own. Figure out who I am without either of you telling me. He said it kindly, but it still stung a little. I'll be okay. I promise. Wednesday arrived with rain, heavy and insistent. I dressed in my best suit again, the armor I needed for battle. Richard picked me up at 1:30, carrying an umbrella large enough to shield us both. Last chance to reconsider, he said as we rode the elevator to Cascade Industries. I need to look her in the eye, I said. I need her to see me. The receptionist led us to a small conference room, not the big boardroom from Friday. More intimate, more uncomfortable. I sat at the head of the table, Richard beside me, our documents arranged precisely. At 2:03, Rebecca walked in. She looked immaculate as always, her blonde hair sleek, her navy dress professional. But there were shadows under her eyes that makeup didn't quite hide, and her smile was strained. Good afternoon, she said, setting down her portfolio. I understand there's been some concern about my department's performance. I've prepared a comprehensive. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes finally registering who sat at the table. Margaret, Mrs. Chun, I corrected gently. Please sit down. She remained standing, confusion and something like fear flickering across her face. I don't understand. What are you doing here? This is my meeting, Rebecca. I requested it. Your meeting? How is that even? The realization hit her in stages. I watched it move across her face like a wave. Confusion, disbelief, denial, and finally, horrified understanding. No. Yes, I said simply. I'm a majority shareholder of Cascade Industries. I own this company. I own the building you're standing in. I've owned them both for years. She sat down heavily, her portfolio slipping from numb fingers. That's impossible. You work in cleaning. I own a cleaning company, I corrected, among other things. Shall we discuss what you own, Rebecca? Or more accurately, what you've taken? Richard slid the financial documents across the table. Rebecca stared at them without touching them, her face losing color. The rental inflation scheme, I continued calmly. $40,000 over 18 months. Small enough to avoid immediate detection, large enough to matter. Did you really think no one would notice? I didn't. She stopped, started again. It was just commission. I was owed it. The amounts I brought in were based on rental rates I specifically mandated should remain affordable for existing tenants. I interrupted. You weren't owed anything. You stole from tenants who trusted us, and you stole from me. The silence that followed was profound. Rebecca's hands trembled on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, stripped of all its usual confidence. Are you going to press charges? I don't know yet, I said honestly. What I want first is to understand why. You have a good salary, excellent benefits, a promising career. Why risk it all for what amounts to pocket change? She laughed bitterly. Pocket change? $40,000 is pocket change to you. Rebecca, I could lose $40,000 of my couch cushions and not notice. So yes, in the context of corporate theft, it's pocket change. But that's not what I asked. I asked why. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. Because it's never enough. Nothing is ever enough. I came from nothing, just like you, but unlike you, I couldn't stand to remember it. Every day, I wake up terrified that someone will see through me, will realize I'm just a girl from a trailer park who got lucky. So you push everyone away first, I said, understanding dawning. You hurt them before they can hurt you. You prove you're better than them, so they can't remind you of who you used to be. Don't psychoanalyze me, she snapped, some of her fire returning. You have no idea what my life was like. You're right. I don't. Just like you had no idea what mine was like when you mocked me over dinner. The difference is, I didn't assume your struggles made you less than me. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to repay every dollar you took. Not from your salary. I know you've already spent most of it on that condo and your car. You're going to get a second job, nights and weekends, whatever it takes. You're going to understand what it feels like to work yourself exhausted just to make things right. And if I refuse, then I press charges. You go to jail for embezzlement, and your career is over permanently. This way, you have a chance to rebuild with integrity. Rebecca's hands shook as she reached for the documents. What about my position here? You're suspended without pay for 3 months. After that, we'll reevaluate based on your progress with repayment and whether you've demonstrated genuine change. Douglas will assign your accounts to others. David, she whispered suddenly. Does David know? About you, about the money, about any of this? He knows about me. Not about your theft. That's your confession to make if you choose to. She closed her eyes. He left me. Sunday night. Said he wanted a separation. I know. Did you tell him to? I don't tell my son what to do with his heart. He made that choice himself. I leaned forward. Rebecca, you're smart and capable. You could have succeeded honestly. Instead, you let fear and greed poison everything good you built. That's on you. Not your childhood. Not your circumstances. You. Tears streamed down her face now, her mascara running in dark rivulets. The polished veneer had completely shattered, leaving behind a frightened woman who'd been running from herself for so long she'd forgotten why. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Tell that to the tenants you overcharged, I said quietly. Tell it to David. Tell it to yourself. But most importantly, prove it through your actions, not just your words. Richard and I left her sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. As we rode the elevator down, he said, You were kinder than I expected. She's broken enough, I replied. Crushing her further wouldn't fix anything. Will she actually change? I don't know. But I gave her the same thing someone once gave me, a second chance to become better. That evening, David came to dinner. We ate the simple food I'd always made, rice, vegetables, soup, and he told me about his plans. Therapy, he said, to understand why he'd lost himself so completely in someone else's expectations. I'm proud of you, I told him, for failing at marriage, for choosing yourself. That takes more courage than staying in something broken. We washed dishes together, the old rhythm of mother and son, and I felt the weight I'd been carrying begin to lighten. A month later, I was tending my garden when a car pulled up. Rebecca stepped out, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No designer clothes, no armor. I'm working at a restaurant, she said without preamble. Nights and weekends. I made the first payment, $5,000. Richard has the check. Okay, I said, continuing to prune my roses. I also wanted to say, I'm sorry. For real this time. Not because you caught me or because I'm scared, but because I finally understand what I did. To the tenants, to David, to you. I looked at her then, really looked. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something more genuine. Humility earned through consequence. That's a good start, I said. I don't expect forgiveness. Good? Because forgiveness is earned over time, not bought with an apology. She nodded, started to leave, then turned back. How did you do it? Build all this while staying kind. I smiled. I remember where I came from. I never let success make me forget that we're all just people trying to survive. Some of us get lucky breaks. That doesn't make us better, just luckier. She stood there a moment longer, absorbing this. Then she got back in her car and drove away. David moved back home with me temporarily while he sorted out his life. We fell into comfortable patterns. Coffee in the morning, walks in the evening, conversations that meandered and deepened. He was finding himself again, the boy I'd raised merging with the man he was becoming. Do you think Rebecca will actually change? He asked one night. I think she has the chance to, I said. Whether she takes it is up to her. And us? Will we ever be okay? We're okay right now. I said, we're exactly where we need to be. 6 months later, I sold MC Properties. The timing was right, and truthfully, I was tired. I kept 3 buildings, the ones with sentimental value, and donated a significant portion of the proceeds to scholarships for low-income students pursuing business degrees. David started his own consulting firm, using the trust fund I'd finally told him about. He was happier than I'd seen him in years, building something on his own terms. Rebecca completed her repayment in 18 months, working herself to exhaustion, but doing it honestly. When I reinstated her position, she was different, quieter, more thoughtful, genuinely respectful to everyone she encountered. She and David never reconciled romantically. Some broken things can't be repaired. But eventually, they became friends, both of them older and wiser from the wreckage. As for me, I still live in my house in Rainier Valley. I still drive my old Honda, still clip coupons out of habit rather than necessity. But now David understands why. Not because I have to, but because I choose to remember where I came from. The neighborhood kids know me as the grandmother who gives out the best Halloween candy and keeps an eye on everyone's children. They have no idea I used to own half the buildings in Seattle. That's exactly how I like it. On quiet evenings, I sit in Thomas's chair and talk to him about our son, about the lessons learned through pain, about how love sometimes means letting people fall so they can learn to stand. The jade pendant my mother gave me sits in a box upstairs, waiting for the grandchild David says he wants to have someday. When that day comes, I'll pass it along with this story, not as a tale of revenge or triumph, but as a reminder that wealth without wisdom is just noise, and the truest measure of a person is how they treat others when they have nothing to gain. Rebecca taught me that hurt people, but healed people can heal people too. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone who's wronged you isn't punishment. It's the opportunity to become better. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the truth, even when it comes 20 years late and changes everything. I am Margaret Shun. I was a widow, a cleaning lady, a secret magnate, and a mocked mother-in-law. But most importantly, I am a woman who learned that power isn't about proving you're better than everyone else. It's about lifting others up, even when they've tried to push you down, especially then.